Command Tower. The best land in the entire format, right? I mean, it comes into play untapped and you can tap it for whatever mana you want. It's the perfect mana fixing. But I don't actually play this land anymore. And in this video we're gonna talk a little bit about Command Tower and why I don't personally play it, but also explaining why cEDH decks contain so few lands such as 30 or maybe even 29. And let's begin with explaining why cEDH decks contain so few lands, because that is one of the reasons that I don't play Command Tower anymore. But I would also like to mention that this is pretty much just my personal opinions, and there's nothing wrong with having Command Tower in your deck in general. I am basically going to provide you with my reasoning and opinions, and you can draw your own conclusion. But let's begin answering the question of why cEDH decks got so few lands in them. The cEDH format is a really fast and cutthroat format. Now, it's gotten a tiny bit slower with banned Flash, but don't fool yourself or have any illusions, it's still a really fast and impactful format. What is making cEDH in general really fast is that you don't need that much mana to actually win the game. For example, Thassa's Oracle and Demonic Consultation is 2 blue mana and then 1 black mana, a total of 3 mana to win the game. That's achievable on turn 2. This is a turn 1 ad nauseam in your opponent's end step. Turn 1, put Swamp into play, then cast Mana Crypt and pass the turn. In your last opponent's end step, tap the Swamp, cast Dark Ritual, and then tap the Mana Crypt and you cast Ad Nauseam, and from here you should be able to win on your turn 2. Alright, the turn 1 and turn 2 dreams are actually quite rare, but they actually happen from time to time, but turn 3 wins are actually quite common. However, it's not just combo that is fast, it's just the game itself that's really quickly. I mean, I have actually seen a turn 2 Kenrith hit the battlefield a few times.
Tap this one, play the Sol Ring, play a land for turn.
Wait, this is a turn 2 Kenrith.
Play Kenrith.
And the turn 2 Kenrith in this example happened with something called Fast Mana from Mana Crypt and Sol Ring. And in his turn 1 he used Enlightened Tutor to find Sol Ring to make this possible. So because this format is a really quick format, usually games ends around turn 4, potentially turn 5, and rarely goes to the turn 8. It happens sometimes that games goes to turn 8 or plus turn 8, but the main focus, the big impactful things that happen are happening around turn 1 to turn 3, and you don't need more than 3 lands in order to be impactful in those 3 early turns. Because of this speed and the threat of this speed from your opponents, decks run around on a really low CMC, not just because we have Ad Nauseam and Dark Confidant and we want to have a really low CMC in general for your Ad Nauseam to reach a really full potential, but because you want to be able to interact with your opponents and you want to be able to win early in the game just because it is this fast potential format. Because of this, it's actually quite risky to have some really expensive cards in your deck such as Nesahal Primal Tide and Razaketh the Full-Blooded, because they could be dead cards on turn 2 when your opponents are trying to win. You would rather have some interaction or some way of winning. The reason we actually have these creatures in some cEDH decks is because we are tricking them into play, reanimating, etc, etc. But another big reason why we are able to survive on a really low land count is because in this format we are actually quite good at drawing cards. For example, we have some commanders like Tymna the Weaver that is drawing 1 to 3 cards per turn. We also have Kenrith that is also quite good at drawing cards. But we also play a bunch of typical blue cantrip spells such as Ponder, Preordain and Brainstorm, and with these cards you can basically tweak your hand a bit. So if your hand is flooded with lands, you will draw something that isn't a land, but if your hand is lacking lands, then you can use these to get land drops for your turn. But we also play a whole bunch of wheels, and the best scenario when someone is resolving a Wheel of Fortune is that you draw 1 land and the remaining 6 are just pure gas. So this means we gotta be really picky about what cards we're going to include in our decks. For example, Exotic Orchard, Command Tower Mana Confluence and the Forbidden Orchard are all coming into play untapped, and that is great for the speed, but also they tap for whatever mana that you need, so they are perfect mana fixing. I wanna emphasize on the part where these lands are coming into play untapped, because if you have lands entering tapped, you're running the risk of being a little bit too slow in this fast-paced format. But how good are these lands actually? And if we only have 30 lands or 29 lands to construct our deck with, are these really the ones we want to have? This is a fetch land. a random whatever one, Arid Misa. It comes into play untapped, and you can sacrifice it to find a plains or a mountain. But because you're allowed to find non-basic lands, you're allowed to fetch Tundra, Taiga and Badlands, and that means you could mana fix perfectly with this thing. But there's also an amazing shuffling synergy with fetch lands together with top deck manipulation or top deck observation, such as Sylvan Library, Brainstorm and Senses Divining Top. I mean, no one can deny the great synergy with a fetch land and a Brainstorm. You basically put 2 cards back on top of your library that you don't want to have, and then crack a fetch land and shuffle those 2 cards away, and hopefully draw into something a lot better. And if you have trash on top of your library from your Sensei Divining Top, you can just crack a fetch land and fix the trash for you. But there's also great synergy with graveyards, such as Underworld Breach. When you cast your Underworld Breach, you want to have a huge grave so that you're able to do a lot with the red enchantment, but also with cards like Dig Through Time, with Delve. With Delve, you can decrease the cost by exiling cards from your grave to shrink it down to basically 2 blue mana, and fetch lands are great to achieve a great Dig Through Time effect. And also, fetch lands are decreasing the percentage chance of drawing lands the further the game goes. Now, this is something people are debating back and forth if it's something that is actually having an impact, but if you do the math, the later the game goes and the more fetch lands that you crack, the lower the risk of you drawing a land the later the game goes. Now, I'm not saying that Tundra is better than Command Tower, but I think that Polluted Delta is way stronger than Command Tower, and to make Polluted Delta good, you want to have Tundra in your deck. So we want to play as many fetch lands that we are allowed to play, and if you're playing on 4 color or 5 color, you're allowed to play all 10 fetch lands. If you're on 3 color, you can play 9 fetch lands. And after that, we have to slot in a bunch of fetch targets so it becomes consistent. I mean, the terrible outcome is that you crack a fetch land and you don't have a target for it. That's really sad. That's actually happened in a few games, and the reason it happens is because it became a long dragged out game and they didn't have enough fetch targets inside the deck. So you want to have some dual lands and maybe even some shock lands as well. And then you want to have some basic lands at the very least, and you want to have a forest. And the reason why you want to have a forest is because of Blood Moon and Back to Basic. And the reason you want a forest is because you only need 1 green mana to cast a Nature's Claim or a Bird of Paradise to get yourself out of that hellhole. I recommend having something between 1 to 3 basic lands inside the deck. After the forest, you should go for the island and the swamp. And the reason you want to have these basic lands is because the very existence of Assassin's Trophy, a staple in the cEDH format. Sooner or later, you're going to run into someone casting this at you, and you don't want to come empty-handed out of the situation, because you're allowed to search for a basic land and put it into play. But then we have some really amazing lands, such as, for example, Gaia's Cradle. Now, Gaia's Cradle can tap something between 1 to 3 mana, and that's great if your commander goes by the name of Thrasius. You definitely want to have a Gaia's Cradle if you have a bunch of mana dorks and you're playing a commander like Thrasius. But there are more lands that are taking the spot above Command Tower in my opinion, for example Cephalid Colosseum. It's a land that comes into play untapped. It will tap for 1 blue mana, so that's weaker compared to Command Tower that taps for whatever. It also deals 1 damage to you. Yeah, why would you want to play this? But if you have Threshold, you can pay 1 blue mana and tap this to target player will draw 3 cards and then discard 3 cards. So this is great when you want to draw more gas, when you want to change the cards you have in your hand, but also there is a really amazing synergy with Notion Thief. If you have a Notion Thief in play and you crack Cephalid Colosseum, target one of your opponent. Now, because of Notion Thief, that player won't draw any cards, you draw 3 cards and that player will discard 3 cards. This is a really amazing and evil synergy, but also a really common win con in this format is Fast as Oracle, and in response to the Fast as Oracle trigger, you activate Cephalid Colosseum and that player will die. Remember when we talked about how fast this format actually is when you use Soldering to cast your Ad Nauseam or Kenrith really early in the game? Well, Ancient Tomb is a great land you probably should play. It taps for 2 colorless mana and you will lose 2 life, but the part where it taps for 2 mana is actually quite amazing. What we are currently doing is finding lands that are providing something that is a little bit different compared to what a normal land does. So Command Tower's basic function is to mana fix and come into play untapped, but fetch lands are in general quite capable of doing that. And if you feel that your mana fixing isn't really suffering and you have the colors that you need in general when you play your deck, then having a few utility lands is probably going to increase some other powers for your deck in general. When you ask people around the world, they often say that islands are the best basic lands in the entire game, and sometimes even say that islands are the best cards in the entire game, because blue is obviously the best color in the Magic. Now, I actually disagree, and this is of course just my personal opinion, but I think forests are the best basic lands in the entire game, because forests with the green mana grants you access to Bird of Paradise and something like Utopia Sprawl. You see, green is the color fixing color. Now, maybe I should mention something about me. I'm always playing all 5 colors no matter what. If I'm playing a standard deck, I'm most likely going to do everything I can to turn that deck into a 5-color deck. The same with Modern, Legacy, Vintage, whatever format I'm going into, it's always going to be 5-color deck no matter what. So this is now coming directly from someone that is addicted to playing 5-color decks no matter what. I don't play Command Tower because I consider and feel that my decks, my 5-color decks, are so good at color fixing that I actually don't need Command Tower. And something I also really like are lands with utility abilities that is increasing my capabilities in other areas for my deck. And because I feel from all the games that I play that I have so good color fixing that I can actually sacrifice some of that color fixing by cutting Command Tower for some of these utility lands that I might need to increase my interaction in other areas that I wanna strengthen my deck at. For example, I have actually seen people do this, and this is showcasing a tiny bit of the potential speed of this format. Turn 1, Faithless Looting. Turn 2, something like Animate Dead, returning Nessahal Primal Tide from your grave that you discarded with Faithless Looting. But here we have an interaction from a land. So in order to cope with this speed, we're using our lands to deal with our opponents. You can also do this out of the blue with a big surprise factor with something as a silly crop rotation. So in the end, Command Tower simply doesn't make the cut for me. But I want to actually showcase a land. Forbidden Orchard actually has some really strange powers and potential to it. You see, Tymna exists inside this format, and if Tymna or something is attacking one of your other opponents, I would say it's a really good strategy to activate Forbidden Orchard and give that player a token so he can block Tymna and deny the Tymna card draw. That is actually really good. But I actually think that this is a good example that is showcasing why I'm cutting Command Tower, because I'm looking for more balance for my deck in general, by removing down a little bit on the color fixing to increase other areas I want to strengthen. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed the video. If you like what I do and you wanna support me, feel free to share my videos or even checking out my Patreon page. Also, purchasing cards from the TCG Players website using the affiliate link in the description below of the video will also help the channel grow. So a big thank you to all of you.